And I'm actually going to. Hello, St. Peter United. We are so excited to be here with you this afternoon to talk about Widen the Welcome, St. Peter United for Mental Health. And we are starting this journey. As many of you know, we've been talking about this for quite some time. It's been in several of my sermons, and we've had another coffee hour as well, too, in which we talked about mental health. So we are so glad to be here with you this afternoon. Myself, of course, here, and Devaney Knight, who is absolutely awesome, member of St. Peter United and a mental health professional, has an amazing, thriving practice in Northeast Houston, and is also, very helpful in terms of referrals and helping to get members of our congregation mental health help if they need it. So we're so glad to be here this afternoon. We'll be talking about stigma. We'll be talking about the difference between pastoral care and mental health care in terms of like going to get therapy and which professionals to see. So lots of good stuff today. It's a great day to have this conversation. I think the sun is somewhat out, so we can, this will be held in a beautiful space today. So Devaney, thank you so much for doing this and for your support and your guidance, in this process as well. So I think we'll just go ahead and jump into the conversation.
Yes. I think that, there's no better way to just kind of start this discussion. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm always seeking, even in my own journey of understanding just our humanity, mental health, spiritual health. I just want to, again, put out there that each of us are still sort of individually and collectively on this journey. And I include myself in that as well. So I'm very excited and happy to be holding this dialogue with you here today.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that the comments are also open, Devaney. I don't know if you're able to see them on the side. I just clicked on comments, so I just typed welcome. So if you have questions as we go through this, please drop them in there. We'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. If you also have an amen you want to throw in, we love those as well too. We love the encouragement. We love, when you let us know that we are on the right track. So to get started today, because I brought up some stuff during the sermon about stigma and how in some congregations we try to suppress the idea of going to get mental health, any type of mental health assistance, and this notion that God can fix all things. And, that a scripture and a prayer and, and several meetings with the pastor will help reverse those things, or that we can get a breakthrough, right? Like that's some language that comes up a lot, that we can get a breakthrough or that we can be delivered from a particular situation. And I've personally found that my deliverance and my breakthroughs and all of that, that language around getting better than where you are or helping yourself to make better choices has tended to happen in a combination of ways. And that's one, through pastors that preach the text in ways that are revelatory, in ways that are relevant to today and can highlight those systemic issues back then and how the systemic issues show up today. And then also having a therapist. And so I don't know how much stigma is around that. I've just decided to be vulnerable about it and I talk about it and I say that I'm doing it. And I constantly remind people. So I have no idea of what the fallout is behind that. I just do it because I like being transparent about it. So can you tell us a little bit about stigma? Where does this come from? Because I'm sure you've probably seen this in some patients.
Yes, I have witnessed, and I would even, dare I say, even experienced stigma as it relates to mental health. I remember being in college and deciding to approach therapy as a viable way to deal with certain issues and complications. And I remember being very, very quiet about that. And not being very forthcoming with family and friends of like, hey, I sit down with a professional and I talk about different things. And so when we think about stigma, I think it's really important to understand what it is that we're dealing with, because before we can talk about like, how do we undo that? We have to understand how it's built and how it's constructed and understand what the impact is, because we have received and accepted, and we have freely engaged in very stigmatizing conversation, even as Black folks, around what does it mean to actually get help and to get support. So I think it's important that we understand that stigma in its very definition is a false belief. Stigma.
Oh, see, I think you're going to be dropping some nuggets, and y'all gonna have to bear with us because we don't have all the nuggets in the thing just yet. So stigma is a false belief.
Is a false belief. Yes. And dare I also say that, stigma is socially constructed, right? We have agreed collectively as a community, as a society, that those who are either mentally ill, have challenges, are also frightening, unpredictable, strange, deviant, right? These are sort of the false beliefs that we don't like to believe that we believe in, but in our conversations and our reactions and our behavior, that is the vein through which we treat mental health. Stigma is also the false belief that mental and behavioral disorders are personally controllable. And if people can't get better on their own, they must lack some form of personal effort. They are to be blamed for their condition, and they are personally responsible for their condition. Stigma enables us to see mental health through a single lens in terms of severity. When we hear mental health, we hear schizoaffective disorder. We hear agoraphobia, folks who don't want to leave their house. We only see the really severe, extreme, frightening manifestations, right? Sort of all or nothing. So you're either crazy or you're well, right? You're either hearing stuff that other people can't hear, seeing stuff that other people can't see, or you're well and you're okay. And if you're over here, you ought to be able to deal with whatever life throws your way smoothly and seamlessly. And so when I talk about stigma as a false belief, we're talking about how do we dismantle and unlearn some of the things that we don't like to admit we believe. And so that is both very individual. It's also very collective. The statement about, how we have scriptures, we have breakthroughs. We all know what it's like to sit in a service and have a breakthrough moment. Mm-hmm. A breakthrough moment is usually a very brief period of time where you have a spiritual awakening, epiphany, an aha moment, right? In therapy, we call that insight, right? It exists, moments of gaining some sense of like clarity, right? Like, I'm being abused in this relationship. Right. This is abuse. Yeah. Those are moments of insight. Now, what we do with that is a secondary conversation. And when we talk about healing, which, I'm sure is going to come up in our conversation today, when we talk about healing is ongoing, and we confuse insight with the journey and the process, right? We like to believe that, instantaneously, boom, I was delivered from this abuse, and now I can move on and live happily and freely. But what they don't tell you often from the pulpit is that when you leave here today, you're going to get triggered again, and you're going to fall back into some of those same responses and reactions. And so I think it's really important that we understand that there's a lot of work to be done around sort of destigmatizing mental health and viewing it only through the lens of extreme severity. Mental health looks a number of different ways. Mental health looks like that too, right? And so I think it's really important that we sort of open up, as we're talking about widening the welcome, we have to make space for stigma and be able to identify it as false belief.
See, and I think that's where I think that's part of what I was struggling with, because there's let me not even say that. Thank you for raising it the way that you have phrased it, because I before we get to the breakthrough and the insight piece, I think you've mentioned a thing that that really generates the stigma, and by and large, it's really, how do we at St. Peter create a culture in which people are willing to go and get the help that they need, but also understand that just because you go, it doesn't mean we're just trying to figure out what's going on. And even if it is something like being bipolar or schizo, how did you phrase?
Oh, there's different kinds: schizoaffective schizophrenia. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So like even if it is those things, like, you still should go and try to find out what's going on. And I think that people avoid mental health because of the stigma that is around those things, that they think that, well, I don't have those things going on, and so I'm well.
Yeah.
In fact, there are other underlying issues, such as your family system. What did codependency look like in your family system? What has racism done to you? How are you traumatized by what happened on a job? How are you traumatized by what happened in your family? I think that as we widen the welcome, we should also widen the welcome for the conversation to be much more diverse than what it has been. And I think the way you said, there's this bifurcation of like, you're either well or you have like some kind of disorder. And the thing is mental health covers that entire spectrum.
Yeah. Yes. It absolutely does. It absolutely does, which is why I really want to identify the culprit. The culprit is believing in something that simply is not true. And you have to understand, too, that part of how that stigma develops is from ignorance and fear of what we don't know. See, we've come a long way as a field. We've come a long way of like, when the slaves were freed, no one corralled them all together and say, listen, we need to provide you guys with some group therapy intervention to address your trauma.
Right.
No one actually took the time to do that. Right. We're just now sort of being a lot more public about that sort of thing being okay in terms of receiving help. And I do understand that the justification why a lot of folks are very mistrusting, which kind of reminds me of when we were having the God and gays conversation. It took me a while to be like, okay, church hurt and people hurt, they used to be the same thing. Right. Yeah. There are some of us who have received, should I say, hurts from the field of psychology. Some people have been hurt by practitioners in psychology. And so I think it's really important, as we're talking about, pastoral counseling, mental health counseling, that we kind of parallel this conversation in a very similar way.
Yeah.
And I think it's important too, when we talk about inclusion and being welcoming, that there is no condition, experience, disorder, challenge that is going to preclude you from being a part of a collective that is here to welcome and receive you. Yeah. That's really sort of the overarching message that we want to promote to our community.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the way you just framed that as well too, because this is wow. This is good, Devaney. There's, I've been having some conversations with folks around policing, and one of the ways that I've tried to have some conversations that embrace the complexity of all of this is that, like, clergy, pastors, priests, we also get demonized and labeled as bad. It does not help me that the Catholic Church has priests that are involved in scandal. It does not help me that the Southern Baptist Church have pastors that were abusing young women in their youth ministries. That does not help the profession of pastoring. And so I think the point that you're raising is that, like, there's also this, the truth that, like, there have been mental health professionals that have not helped the profession, just as there are pastors that don't help the profession either. And then we also have pastors and mental health professionals that are like, mental health professionals saying, you don't need a church. You just need to do therapy.
Yeah.
People saying,
Yeah.
you don't need a therapist. You just need God.
Yeah.
So you get kind of stuck in this polarity, trying to make a difference between the two. And I would argue that in and of itself is traumatizing.
It is, because it's almost like saying I either have to adjust this, I either have to approach it spiritually, or I have to approach it this way, and they cannot live together. And I think that's one of the most important, I think, unstated intentions around St. Peter and mental health, is that from the pulpit, I think what's being normalized is the actual mention and conversation about mental health. And it's coming from a spiritually ordained individual who is saying both and. Can it be both and? Right? These are tools we're talking about, right? If you are trying to approach a goal, something, right? I want to live healthier. Okay, well, part of it is diet.
Yeah.
Part of it is exercise.
Yes.
Part of it is stress and sleep.
Yes.
Part of it is your mantras, your affirmations, what it is you're telling yourself on a day-to-day basis about your body, about your behavior, about what you're putting in your body. All of it kind of works together. And the reason why I'm so thrilled about this conversation is because we are normalizing both together the same. They can coexist together. You can have you some Jesus.
Yes.
You can have you some Bible. You can have some of this and some of that. You can also have some of something else. Yeah. You can kind of put together and create that mix. And so I noticed there are a lot of churches that are slowly warming up to talking about mental health, but they're in the mode of just really having to educate themselves first. So
I feel as though it's, and I guess it kind of comes out of my own journey as well too, but I feel like there have been times when something has been said in church that has made me have a thought about, you know what? Why am I not able to receive that? I'm struggling with that. And I know this to be something that is true. For example, you are worthy of what? I'm worthy. I'm valuable, right? So that is not for my pastor to help me figure out. My pastor can continue to say, you are worthy, you are valuable. God loves you, Jesus loves you, give you the scriptures that prove that, preach sermons that affirm that. But in terms of getting onto the root of why you don't feel valued and why you don't feel worthy, and why that is impacting so many other areas of your life, you need a mental health professional to do that. And I think it's not I have had insights and I have had breakthroughs. And what I do now is I use my insights and my breakthroughs, using the language like breakthrough being from the church and insights being from therapy. I use both of them to inform each other now. Right? So when I get an insight in one place, I use it to inform my theology and my awareness of scripture and where Jesus is showing up. When I get a breakthrough in one place, I use it to say, this supports the journey that I'm on and what my therapist has said. These two things are in alignment.
Yes.
And so helping people see that they can bring things into alignment and see how they're being, in my terms, God is using their journey, that God is using both of these things. And the truth is that like all of it is happening in spirit and in God, in my opinion, right? It's us that have these false limiting beliefs that these two things are separate. But the functioning of our minds and the power of our minds, theologically for me, is a spiritual action. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because I'm just further along. Like that is this is all spirit to me.
And I think it's important to emphasize too that when people are, getting help is, and I remember growing up and hearing this, that therapy in essence is secular.
Yes. Yeah.
It is not to lead you in the path or direction of God. In fact, is going to cause you to have to question some things. It's going to have you revise and delve deeply into some things. And there are a lot of Christians that are fundamentally threatened by that notion.
Yeah.
So when we talk about cultural sensitivity and we're talking about diversity and inclusion, our field has come a very long way in terms of understanding the importance and relevance of multicultural competence.
Mm.
So, for example, if I am working with someone who believes in a different faith than I do, the onus is kind of on me as a therapist to kind of understand some of the basic tenets and nuances of those beliefs before I even approach someone and say, tell me more about, your frame of reference and where you're coming from. It behooves me as a person who wants to help to understand a little bit more of some of those in and outs. And on top of that, your experience of those in and outs spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
Good therapy makes space for that.
Yeah.
When we talk about, getting help and finding the right match and finding the right fit, sometimes that takes time. But the good ones that are out there at least have some curiosity and say, hey, listen, I really want to support someone and be affirming of those beliefs that have brought them to this point, that have sustained them to this point. And then we're going to work on some tweaks and pivots on the areas that cause them the most trouble.
Yeah.
So a lot of times the fear is someone is going to lead me away from the path that I want to believe in. They're going to move me beyond or cause me to question the very existence of God. Good therapy should not cause you to have to change all of your spiritual beliefs. That would be otherwise oppressive. And so we kind of want to move into talking a little bit, or normalizing, I should say, talking about spirituality and mental health as sort of being in a very similar vein.
Yeah. I think this is why I just love and enjoy my therapist, is that she is former Christian, so she can speak the language, and she's also into African traditional religions. So it's this weird overlap. And as a seeker, as a person that, is fascinated by different religions and fascinated by history, and definitely fascinated by what religion did we as Black people have before we had Christianity, and how did that serve us? So it's interesting when she frames things in ways that is consistent with scripture, and also consistent with what is practiced in Ifa. It's interesting when she's able to do that. And that's when I gain some additional insight as well too. So I think what you're saying is when you can widen the conversation, the welcome, the session, and then also layer in and make room for all of these different ways of being and these cultural ideas and notions that we have, that's extremely helpful. I did have a pastoral counseling session recently, and it came up that that this person's therapist tends to shy away from having any type of religious conversation, just shuts it down, and what that does is it creates well, are you really telling me the truth? Because you don't want to let God into this conversation. So I don't know if I can really trust you. Right. So does that even, in that case, is the session helping if you're being told you're okay, but the spiritual part is not being addressed?
Yeah.
Right? Just like, oh, don't mind that church. They said you're going to hell, but don't worry about that. Right. So
yeah.
Working through those, and how do you think that is best accomplished? Is that something where, because what I said to this person is like, okay, that's what I'm here for. In this case, if you really love that therapist, then that's what I'm here for. So when you hear something there and you think it's suspect, come and talk to me, and we can find. I said, because it sounds as though the therapist is doing their best to lift you out of what you've been in, and they may not have the language. I have the language, but that doesn't mean I'm better than them. It just means we can possibly work in concert together. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's really important, when you think about really the experience, the client experience in counseling, right? Because there may be some things that, and this is why it's very important to, look into, when you're looking for someone, do they offer a 15-minute consultation where you can say, hey, here it is in a nutshell. Are we a match? Are we a fit? A lot of therapists, and I hate to simplify it in this way, but a lot of therapists can only carry folks as far as they've been.
Mhm.
right? We are lifelong learners. Like we have to do CEUs every year if we want to continue to practice. We got to go to conferences. We're always having to stretch, ourselves and hold one another accountable in consultation with each other. And so I do consult with other therapists, and these kind of things come up. And it's interesting. I'm actually part of a consultation group where each of us is a different religion, which is
Oh, wow.
beautiful because I get to hear all about different perspectives, and I'm like, that sounds like Christianity in a way, and so we have that. But I would say that there's really nothing wrong with someone taking what works for them and then leaving the rest. And when they feel like they have grown as far as they can grow, being willing to make pivots and changes as needed. I will say too, the relationship between a therapist and a client is just that. It is a relationship that is built on safety, that is built on trust. And when a person feels like they can't reveal or show, that is indicative of a need for additional conversation and dialogue around what that is and where that's coming from. Because a good healer will be able to introspect without ego. A lot of practice, right? It takes a lot of practice. We're constantly challenged around it, but that's what makes this work so sensitive and difficult, for lack of a better way of saying it. And so it's very important, I think, when we're talking about trust and safety, like what that is, it's a relationship unlike any other relationship that you will have.
Yeah.
And so then how do you trust that and lean into that and be able to say, sometimes I feel like when I talk about God or the word or whatnot, I feel like we turn down a different path. And, I'm wondering if you noticed that too.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people don't always feel empowered to say those things, but this is why I emphasize it's so important to build relationship, with someone that you find that trust and rapport with. I'm looking here in the comments, and April Maria said the stigma, this is going back to stigma. The stigma that I have is that I will be seen as weak, especially as I try to advance at work. Part of the stigma was created partly by me, but part is due to comments that have been made to me in the past. I really love that comment. Words are powerful. Man, they're powerful. I think it's really important to also recognize just really the function of our language, how we create meaning, how others see us. We can internalize that, therefore, seeing ourselves that way. Stigma is so very convoluted. And I love how you talked about in your sermon that we are Black and white people, not from a racial perspective, right? But we love to see this or it's this, and we love to know what's coming next.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important that we really pay attention to those and other things that really we don't recognize that they're contributing to a very stigmatizing way of believing and thinking. But that's part of what therapy does, is that it awakens the things that you would otherwise sort of be dismissive of or, not self-aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when it comes to the church and some of the possibilities that we have there, I'm excited to be on this journey. I'm excited for us to continue to have this conversation. And there was a lot of great positive feedback today about the sermon and people saying, I'm like you too. And I'm like, or I do this, or I do that. Thank you for giving me permission to say this and say that. And it's one of those. So here's another example I have. Like Marcus and I are sometimes just like, so this is great. This is a good example. We did the God and gaze thing, right? And I walked away from that being like, wow, like there's still, not in a bad way, but there's still more education to do. And not everybody is where I'm at. Like sometimes, I think I'm the center of the universe. And so like, if this is my belief, then this must be everybody's belief. Like everybody must be as healed. Everybody must be as healed as I am. Everybody must be where I'm at. And it's like, no, like there is still this work to be done. And so my prayer is that as we continue to explore sexuality and spirituality and possibly even make that a part of our focus as well too, because there are folks who are showing up now and they have this struggle. So as we are tackling that, can we also address mental health and be vulnerable and be honest and have conversations with each other and talk about our journeys. And I think the more that we normalize that and the more we share with each other, it will give other people permission to start that journey of healing as well.
I think what you'll notice is that as I've been part of St. Peter since I think it was August of whenever God engaged in, I was like, this is my home. And, so from that point on till now, this has been my home. But what I will say to you as well is that based on what we know about how change happens, right? Because you've been saying from the pulpit for a very long time, go to therapy, right? And depending on who is sitting in the congregation, whether that's virtually, in person, or otherwise, the person who is still struggling with that aspect of their journey is going to immediately be internally resistant to that.
Yes.
And that's what's going to happen time and time again because of how change happens, right? We integrate a new piece of information. We integrate a new resource. There's there's Leslie. He's going to be talking about mental health. Here he go, right? That's going to happen. And as you are, continuously normalizing the conversation, then we're having this conversation and we're going to, be talking about whys and like all those other things. It's slowly going to become part of our spiritual norm over time.
Right.
Because just like when, I do family therapy and, I do an intervention that is meant to challenge the family system, what that family system does is it begins to agitate itself. Right? Because it really wants to restore the status quo. We want to continue to engage in the loud back and forth and cussing each other out. And so we're going to try to make that fit into what we're doing. So we're going to really resist that. And so, in the church family, same thing. We're really starting to really normalize this conversation. I love examples set by the UCC, other churches that have gone through this, process, and they get it and understand it. It's becoming slowly over time more normalized, right? And I think that the stigma really is supported by fear, right? Fear that if I have a disorder, a diagnosis, then what the hell does that mean about me? I must be defective. I must be defective. Right. And so I love this quote. I was actually pulling up I have been on a Billy Porter diet for for a bit. I've always been a fan, but this one quote he says, we need to understand that whatever we do, we're all human beings first. We're all human beings first. The statistics, 1 in 5, Black folks, LGBT folks, underserved. Those statistics are not by happenstance.
Right. Yes.
Right. And so as we start to continue to destigmatize mental health, normalize mental wellness, normalize the conversation, what we're going to find over time is that the family system, the church, the organization eventually will mold into that culture. Will eventually lean into that culture, because right now the talk of mental health is still ruffling some feathers.
Yes, it is. I could feel it through the camera. I could feel it in the congregation. Like I could feel the energy around the resistance that's there. And interestingly enough, what I'm feeling is not like I don't want to have this conversation. I don't want to, or I think this is horrible and you shouldn't do it. It's just wow, like I'm struggling with this. I want to do this, but I don't know what's beyond. Like there's no certainty beyond if I take these steps, what I should do. And so the thing that we're having to do is to say it's okay to get the help, and then also make sure people feel welcome to talk about the help that they're getting and welcome in the congregation, regardless of diagnosis. I like that you said that it will normalize over time. There's Kinzingberg, I can't remember the name of the guy, but he did this thing to where like there's a circle and we all have our core beliefs, right? And in that circle he put your core beliefs, and then right outside of that circle he put the adjacent possible. So ideas come our way, and if it's adjacent possible, then it could potentially move into our core belief.
Yeah.
And then outside of that circle is the not possible. And so the not possible, if you're constantly bumping up against somebody's not possible, then they entrench around their core belief.
Yeah.
Right? Like they don't want to hear it, they don't want to feel it, or they think they're right in what they believe and what they think, then they will wrap themselves up around their core belief, and it makes the adjacent possible even more impossible, right? Yeah. And they become even more entrenched in the belief. They become even more polarized. They become, the more you keep poking at it, the more entrenched they get in the belief. And so I think we've got a significant amount of people who are in that adjacent possible right now. And it was very helpful to get some positive feedback with people, like I said, saying that's me, or I connect with that, or I'm going to do better, or to be open to things. And then there is some resistance, in terms of like, why are we having this conversation? Yeah. And to me, we cannot address the sexuality and the spirituality without also addressing our mental health.
Absolutely.
And goes along with that. I think we have to address both of those. Even talking about the difference between church hurt and people hurt is a mental health discussion that is birthed out of spirituality. Yeah. But even getting that distinction is a type of a mental health, discussion.
It is. And when you really think about just sort of the history, I don't want to go back into all the historical roots, but depression, right? Anhedonia was that. Depression used to be treated as demonic possession. Demonic possession. So when we talk about how that has evolved over time, and then we look at them now as being sort of two totally different entities, and then they can actually coexist. Do you understand how crisis provoking that is for a lot of people? Wow. I just want to normalize how I want to normalize the feeling people get as a result of stigma.
Yeah.
I don't want to normalize stigma.
Yeah.
I want to normalize the reaction that people have based on those false beliefs. There is some unlearning for us. So even that is a process in and of itself. I remember years ago, I sat with someone, and I can't remember how many weeks or months it was that we just talked about stigma. I really don't want to be here. Okay, well, let's talk about how we feel about that today.
Wow. Yeah.
Until you can feel safe, seen, and be able to say, this is going to be some hard stuff that we're going to approach. But we do not have to boil the ocean on all of our beliefs. We simply have to look at the ones that would otherwise keep us from seeking out the supports and the help that we need. One of the questions that I wanted to raise for you is, how do you feel is the best way for congregants, members to approach pastoral counseling? And then also talking about how, the approach and expectation from pastoral counseling, the approach and expectation of mental health, how are they similar? How are they different? How you would speak to that.
So there are pastors who choose to kind of be focused in this particular area where they are also therapy. They're trained in both. And then there are pastors that are good at doing pastoral care, which is kind of like therapy light, right? And you address things with scripture and with prayer and things like that, and be supportive in that way. And then, so in the pastoral profession, we all don't have the same focus. We all may not be didn't pick the same thing to focus on while we were in seminary. So my seminary, for example, I could have picked to make theology my focus. I could have picked to make church history my focus. I could have picked to make New Testament my focus, or Old Testament my focus, right? Ethics. I even could have made Christian ethics my focus. So I'm saying all this to say that there are different pastors that are skilled and gifted in different ways. And if they've done what they needed to do in seminary, they also picked a focus that was in their passion area that they could continue to learn and grow and develop in. So for me, my passion is Bible, and in particular, the New Testament. but I have to know the Old Testament because the Old Testament gets quoted a lot in the New Testament. So that provides us additional context, right? So that was my focus. That's what I focused on. You're going to get where I'm going with this, right? After seminary, I was working in nonprofit and being like a pastor in an organization doing organizational development. I have a second master's that I got because of that work in organizational, positive organizational change and development. So my focus is very business oriented and very Bible oriented. Right? So pastoral counseling is not a passion of mine. And I'm aware of this.
Yeah.
Right. And so me saying I'm gonna only do 3 and encourage and support as best I can. And if you want me to work with your therapist, I mean, I'm not going to ever go against what a therapist has said. I want you to come back to me and say, this was healing and helpful for me. What does the Bible say about it? And how does that work? Right. So we can work together. But my point is that that's not my passion and that's not my focus. And it's actually a waste of the church's resources for me to be doing something that I know is not going to really help. So that's why I say you get 3 appointments on the same issue. I'm open to more appointments, but 3 on the same issue. And then we refer out and we figure out what's going to be the best next step. That's not to say that we won't hire someone. Jay loves pastoral counseling. I think he's discerning things. He's trying to figure it out. So in this case, we have a position that will eventually grow, and then there will be a resource for that. But even in that, I think it's important, even if your pastor does have therapy and counseling gifts and skills and passion, if that is not their thing and they have not been clear about that, if they don't say I'm educated and I can do what Devney can do, then you need to go get you a Devney, right? In addition to the pastor. So I think that there's a range of ways that we can look at this, but for me, and just so St. Peter is aware, I didn't take a lot of classes in it. I don't even think I took a class in it. And I did not, and it's not a passion of mine. And so what happens is it becomes an opportunity to vent. And like I said in my sermon, we need someone to talk to and we need opportunities to vent, but I don't know that anybody in the congregation wants my time to be spent doing something that we know there will not be any kind of outcome and change based on what's happening.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say too, I don't know because I'm not in the room when it happens, but with pastoral counseling and pastoral care, there is something really specific that folks are looking for in that, like they want to be sort of told something or offered something through a spiritual lens, and it feels safer to talk with a pastor than to go out and talk to like a complete stranger. And so I'm also wanting to make space in this conversation for, the potential, process behind the approach to you as being sort of that person. There's a rapport, there's a safety. Like I can kind of maybe predict the ways in which you'll advise me or support me through this, but that process has a very distinctive ending point. Right?
So what I'm not saying is don't bother me with it. I want to know because I'm still a pastor. I still shepherd, care for, love the people. I'm not saying I don't want to know. I want to know. I need to know if something is going on. What I'm saying is I want to be supportive in the process and make sure you're getting the help that you need. And if I need to walk alongside as things go or check in occasionally, I want to hear that. So to your point, yes, the pastor becomes kind of the check-in point, and a good pastor will know this is beyond my expertise and will refer people to where they need to go. And this is why I encourage UCC pastors to stay on the couch too, stay on the sofa, because you don't know what you don't know. And as you explore yourself, you get better at identifying what other people are struggling with as well too. Right. So you can make that referral out. So absolutely always wanting to journey with people. This just is about, are you getting the help that you need? And pastors are not Jesus Christ, and they don't hold all the answers. And it is best to make sure you are getting the help from the person you need to get the help from. If you need open heart surgery, you don't go to a gynecologist to do that. I know those are two extremes, but I needed to be that clear about in between,
Yes.
right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I also do want to normalize. This is what I do want to normalize. The questions, the feelings, the thoughts, the narratives we create about what it means to sit with a therapist. First of all, I think Hollywood is getting a smidge better.
A smidge.
A smidge, and that's a small smidge. Better at really demonstrating and illustrating, like, what does, therapy look like? Therapy is not always, you boo-hooing, snot flying across the room, and then you leave just broken. If you're leaving broken, please email me. So, therapy is to be restorative. Therapy is to be supportive. When we talk about, like, what's the difference between pastoral counseling and mental health counseling provides this sort of open-ended, and there's different modalities, and there's brief treatments and long-term treatments. But if you can kind of think about it, I remember saying this to a new person I talked to recently, I want you to pretend that in this 50 minutes, the 50 minutes is an infinite amount of time, right? How do you relax into feeling safe with a stranger? I want to really normalize that, because I really do believe that folks who maybe you referred to talk to someone, or said, hey, here's Devaney's email address, she can help you connect with someone. The folks that drop the ball on that, I imagine it's because of something very normal.
Yeah.
Is, where do I start? How do I even think about what to expect? And all, there's all those different questions, which is, again, why normalizing this conversation is so very important. It's of tantamount importance. And so I think it's helpful to hear, really, where does one end and then where does one begin?
Yeah.
Right. Because that's really the question, or the fear, right? Is, I don't know what's on the other side of that. I like to know what's going to happen.
Right.
Right. And so I want to also make space for that, in conversations like this, that concern is very real, and we're not going to stigmatize that.
Right.
Oh, no. We're not going to stigmatize real legitimate concern, especially if that one friend you told that one thing to and told everybody. Your mama got a loud mouth, and as soon as you talk to her, she's gonna tell everybody, you got to pray for my child, because she still don't know what she's gonna do with herself. How do we take those experiences and then create a different expectation of a relationship with someone we don't know? So I really think it's important to be able to connect with and speak to. If we're gonna say, talk about your mental health here, then how do we demonstrate that it's a safe space to do so?
Yes.
How do we, and we demonstrate safety by normalizing real stuff.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I would add that to whoever gonna see this or hear this, that there's a feeling and reaction from stigma that is legitimate, normalized, and adaptive. I'm gonna stay away from unsafe stuff.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. And I think to your earlier point, as we continue this journey, that will create safer space. And I also want to say, in terms of pastoral counseling, this is also where a pastor can help in terms of encouraging, in terms of moving forward. And, I think what I experience is a referral happens, and then I'm told that, okay, this thing is going to go forward. But then there's not even a check back in with me, because I'm going to hold you accountable, right? So we never talk about that topic again unless I, bring it up. Yeah. And so it's navigating that and understanding what to do with that as a pastor. But I think what you're raising is just that, like, some people may feel safer with me because they've been sitting in the pew for so long, or we've had these engagements. But then I think a good question, I think something for me to explore and for us to explore as a church, is how do we create accountability in the safe space, and how do we help people move forward? And I think that's something that we will learn over time, in terms of, even, do we need a spot on the website that just says, it's called Safe Space, and it talks about what the process is and our value for mental health, and some of the stigmatizing things that are said, and some of the resistance that people will have. Like, do we build up knowledge over time to help people address what they are feeling?
Mhm.
right? So,
Mhm.
so if someone is like, well, why didn't I follow through? Well, it could be any of these reasons, but it may not be. But it may not be.
Yeah.
But talk to your pastor,
Yeah.
and here's how you get a referral. Like all of these things. So how do we create like, you know, more information, more paths on the journey, right? So that people are able to access it, and
Mhm.
some of that fear gets neutralized.
Yeah, yeah. Which kind of leads us into talking about the WISE designation. Because I tell you, I could talk about this stuff all day long. In fact, I do, right? And so,
You're good,
and
Daphne. You're really good, Daphne. You are like, you really walk with people, and I hope people realize and acknowledge like you are walking with me through this conversation too. You're just really good at what you do, and that is so appreciated. Before we hop onto that, I just wanted to hit this. I think Anne Marie posted something. What did she say there? I had a white professor that said something very profound. She said she can never really be culturally competent. She was never known, but can be very aware. But competent as a white woman, she will never be.
mm,
Cultural competence.
mm-hmm.
Cultural competence.
Yeah. Okay. Huh.
That's a big rabbit hole to go down today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What I sense just on its face is that there's culturally competent to me does not mean you know every
That's
culture
right.
and how to act in each culture.
Yeah.
Cultural competence to me means sometimes you just shut your mouth and you listen and you experience a culture and you connect with that culture in that way. And when you're wrong, you're able to say I'm wrong or I apologize and let me, I want to learn more.
Yeah.
And again, here we go with this black and white thinking. We see the two words culturally competent. We think that means I know how to understand black people, white people, Asian people, Mexican people. No, that is not what that means.
Yeah.
Cultural competence, from what I understand, I know you have more of the definition on it, but from what I understand, it just means that you put yourself in a place to be open to other cultures, to learn, to listen, and to be held accountable if you're wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cultural competence, I remember thinking like, wow, competence, that means I'm going to arrive, Hunter.
Yeah.
I am going to arrive at all things knowledgeable around culture, Hunter. You ain't gonna be able to hold a candle to my knowledge, right? and what I love about this conversation, this part of the conversation, because I'm picking up in that statement, like someone is saying, I can never fully know your experience personally, right? Like I don't know what it feels like to be held up at gunpoint, but I do know what terror feels like, and I do know my relationship to fear, but I'm going to put myself in the position of understanding how you experience that. Mm-hmm. So we talk about cultural competence. We're more so like moving from talking about it in the sense of competency to cultural humility.
I love that.
Humility is I'm still learning, I'm on my journey, and I'm learning all of the ins and outs of the impact my own culture has had on other cultures, especially when we're talking about like, white accountability and things like that. Cultural humility says, I'm making space for increasing and deepening my understanding of the other. Mm-hmm. When you approach culture from that vein, you can never get it wrong. Mm-hmm. Never. People, I'm so worried about offending people, and man, I don't know. I've got this black client. I just don't know what to. Okay, let's slow that down.
Yeah.
Right, because there's a narrative supporting this notion that you should have arrived at understanding all of the in and outs of blackness you cannot possibly understand. But the healing comes from humility, openness. I'm still on my journey, and I'm willing to self-inspect along the way.
Yeah. Cultural humility. I mean, again, this goes, and so now when we even want to talk about race, it does make things, I'm using black and white again, and we need better language to address this. But once again, even with cultural humility, me as a black person traveling overseas and visiting other places, I step into those spaces, countries, with a tremendous amount of American privilege.
Yeah. Yeah.
right? When I used to be in the Navy, it was just ridiculous. I was just not a great person, right? Like we go to these other countries and we yell at people like that's going to help them to understand English. And you're just like, no, they speak Spanish. Yelling at them is not going to help them to understand it any better.
Yeah.
But there's a tremendous amount of American privilege when, when I travel. You look at a place like Belgium, where they can't stand Africans, but they love Americans, even Black Americans, right? Like they have a thing against the French and Africans and all this stuff, and they want you to speak Dutch and not to speak. There's all this, when we talk about cultural humility, it's really understanding what is one's culture as well too, and how are you interacting with these other cultures. And it sounds to me like what this woman is saying is that like I'm just going to say I'm not going to do any of the work because I can't get there.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going to be culturally competent. Right?
Yeah.
And I like rolling out the phrase cultural humility. I think that is so much more appropriate than cultural competence. So what does she say as a follow-up? Yes, changing the thought of I'm competent and no longer making any mistakes. She wants us to know that we never stop learning. Amen. Amen. Believing learned experiences. Believing learned experiences.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I like that. And see, and again, I think also that statement though is also a measure of vulnerability, right? Yeah. There are some folks that are just really tired of getting it wrong.
Yeah.
And they don't recognize that part of the solution is in our approach. Part of our solution is in coming to the table with some openness. And so I really love that comment. We never stop learning. We never stop learning. So
it's ongoing. So what were you about to say something about the designation? Is that what we're about to talk about next?
Yeah. So of course, I mean, you and I know that we have been in conversation about pursuing the WISE designation. And I know that this, in terms of like timeline, we're looking at this like in the near future for SPU. And it's not entirely clear of like kind of how that will come together and be yet. But I did want to share with those that are listening that the WISE designation is pursued through the UCC Mental Health Network. And a WISE congregation is a congregation that receives a designation for being welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and the E is engaging, I believe. Engaging. Yes, engaging congregation for mental health. And so it's a designation that would allow us as a community to not just necessarily just sort of have that seal, but to be known as a collective community that is very forward in promoting the normalizing of mental health. Will also make us eligible to receive additional resources. But when we talk about how do we create that welcome, how do we widen that welcome, this designation will go very far in allowing us to be able to do that. And so that process is comprised of a team. And so over time, we will be, putting plugs out there of like, hey, we're putting together the WISE designation team. We definitely think that it's good to have some sort of like the people who are on this team do not have to be mental health professionals, right? That's not a requirement. We do have some mental health professionals as members here at SPU. I'm one of them. We have Maisha, Antoine. We've met to talk about this process, and we do believe that it would be helpful to have someone who is in some form of capacity of mental health to sort of be in an advisory role. But the group of individuals that come together would pursue a series of steps that would lead us to that designation and becoming a WISE congregation, which is a really, really major step for the church.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that introduction to it. What I can say as of this week, I have had a conversation with a couple that has worked, taken St. Peter through a previous UCC designation, and so. I'm waiting to hear back from them. And once I hear back from them in terms of their commitment to leadership, then we will start pulling together that team. And so I'm grateful to you for helping us, get some of this off the ground and for us to have this coffee hour today. And I look forward to when, me, you, Maisha, Antoine, and Cleve, because Cleve is our we got to get him in too. He's been kind of busy with work stuff, and he's got a really, really busy schedule right now, as you all do too. So that's why we're asking for someone else to step up and help us with leadership. And then we'll pull that committee together. I'll be in on the front end for a lot of those meetings for getting some of the stuff up and going. So we don't have a definite timeline yet. We're going to take it. So from a mental health perspective, we also want to model appropriate behavior as a committee. And so in doing that, we want to make sure we all have the space and the time and the commitment for us to do this. And what is the best way to do it? I know most of us, like attracts like. So a lot of us are just like me in the sense of we will try to overachieve and get it done and rush it, and it'll be perfect. It'll be great. And there won't be capacity in terms of there won't be support for people, being involved in doing it. So we want to do this right. We want to approach it right and make sure we have a good team and commitment from folks. There will be some other exciting things that'll come out of this, like small groups, interest groups, where we're also talking about right now, what kind of interest groups do we want to create as we prepare to go back to church? We need to rebuild our community or reconnect our community. So what kind of groups do we want to create? So there will definitely be some type of mental health group that will emerge from this. There is a need for a couples group as well too, and we may have to have a professional help support that group and guide that group. There's just a lot of opportunities in which we need to create some groups that have like interests and cultural values and things like that, so that we can start to break up some of this and bust up some of this stuff and heal together. Mm-hmm. So a lot of that will come out of this as well too. And then how do we approach children's ministry? How do we, if there's a child that's, on the, and forgive me if I'm using the wrong terms, this will be part of it, but if there's a child on the spectrum, mm-hmm. or if there's an autistic child, or like, how will we take care of our children and run the children's church as well too? Mm-hmm. All of that will be included in this conversation, because that is about widening the welcome.
Yeah.
Right. We can't say don't drop your child off because they're autistic. We don't have anybody that can deal with them. Right. How do we educate ourselves, train ourselves, and widen that welcome as a church? Mm-hmm. So, mm-hmm. You have anything more to add to that, Daphne? I know we're at an hour. This has been great. We have because, baby, you are on it.
It's our synergy together. We're very, very interesting mix together, you and I. But I would just say about the WISE designation is that I really want to be clear on the steps and the process. Mm-hmm. I really, and speaking of, destigmatizing mental health, this is not a committee of people who have to have a particular background.
Correct.
This is not for people who know the DSM like the back of their hand. In fact, this is quite the opposite of that. This is quite the opposite of that. If you are a member of SPU and you are fascinated, passionate, open about anything related to mental health, or you have had your own journey that has had some special meaning to you, you can use that as part of being on this committee. This committee is for, in fact, the UCC encourages that some of those members be people who are passionate about mental health because they're in their own work, or, they have, a sibling or a family member, friend who, has mental health and it's something that's important to them. So this is for any general congregant member of the community who wants to be a part of SPU can be a part of this committee. And we'll talk about, I'm sure, more of this in the future, but a committee is comprised of anywhere between, I think, 3 and 12 people. Yeah. So, again, this is not a committee of experts.
Yeah.
It's not a committee of practitioners, right? I really want to make sure that as we talk about widening the welcome, that we're really forward about this is for anybody who sees this as a need and who has the time and the dedication and commitment to be part of a collective as we pursue that designation. And so I'm just sort of echoing what Leslie is saying in terms of how we approach it and how we lead with the right kinds of behaviors, and we're promoting something that will lead us in that direction. This is for anybody. If you are a teenager, we would want to hear from you, and you are very passionate about mental health, or if you are, and you're an encore, but then you also feel very passionate about this, then this would be the space in which you can sort of champion that and pioneer that effort.
Yes, thank you so much. That's great to add. And as we close out, I think our next topic should be about leadership and volunteerism in the church, because another thing that I've noticed is that some of our newer members have never been in a church where they have felt called to lead and to fully be themselves in leadership. So they've had to hide because the church would not allow them to lead or participate in the full life in the church because of their sexuality. So things at St. Peter are a little different. We are a congregational church, which is why Devaney said we encourage the congregants to be on this committee, to be on any committee that interests you and you want to help your church. And so another part of our healing, Devaney, is helping people to understand you are worthy, you matter, your opinion matters, and you are called to lead in this place. Yeah. We will find a spot for you. Yeah. It may take us a minute. We may not have the committee created yet. We may not have the vision created yet around things, but you're all called to lead. Mm-hmm. And even if you don't feel like you're a leader because of your work, or you don't feel like your church has welcomed you to do that, you are welcome to do it here. And a lot of us have had to learn our jobs and our role in the church. This is not about knowing it all up front. Mm-hmm. It's about the willingness to step forward and say, as I said in the sermon, here I am, send me. Yeah. Here I am, send me. Mm-hmm. I'm done. I know that's not the perfect language, but I'm undone. I'm not complete yet. Here I am, send me. And it's okay. We will journey together.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Thank you so much for having me join you today. This has been quite the treat, and I look forward to moving the cause forward and what we do. And I just love the direction that we're going in as a church, because it's such an example to the larger community of what's possible. Some people, they walk into SPU and it is stepping into what you thought was really an impossibility. You mean I'm walking here as I am? What? So even that's a mind shift. And so the direction that you're talking about is going in is all the more going to shake up and challenge what the status quo has been as it relates to mental health in the church. And so I'm just really glad to be a part of interrupting and disrupting that.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here today and lending your expertise. Thank you for everyone that was able to stick around. I encourage you to share this with other people if you think that it will be helpful to them, and if you're proud of your church for doing this, or whatever. If you think that it will help encourage somebody to get on the journey to take care of their mental health, or if you know somebody that is like, hey, I need a church that's gonna that will openly have these conversations and is doing their best to shift the narrative around mental health in the church and for God's people, then to share this video with them. So we will wrap this up for today. Thank you all for being in church today, and thank you for joining us for Coffee Hour. Devaney and more, we will be back with some other conversations that we hope you all will find informative and that you can learn from. So have a wonderful weekend and have a safe Sunday fun day, because I know some of y'all will be crazy.
You're talking to me now.
Have a safe Sunday fun day and have a wonderful Healing Monday. Love you all, and we'll be thinking about you all until we meet again next Sunday. Take care.
God bless.
Bye-bye.